Live.
What we're trying to do is bring the real story to the real person at home.
Get your news the way it should be delivered.
International, national, and also local concern.
No gimmicks, compelling. Just the truth behind the headlines. The region, the nation, the world. Conversations that lead to solutions.
We'll have all the details coming up at 6 o'clock.
Richard French Live, weeknights at 6 on Fios 1 News. You're watching Fios 1 News. It's 6 o'clock.
Tonight, Senator Gillibrand sits down with RFL to talk about her mission to combat the way that sexual assaults are handled when it comes to college campuses. The senator also speaks with us about Superstorm Sandy victims who were ripped off by insurance companies and let down by FEMA. She'll also tell us what she thinks of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech before Congress yesterday. And the nation's highest court hears oral arguments in a case designed to attack Obamacare and pull affordable health insurance away from millions of Americans. Justices appear to be split over whether the Affordable Care Act is in violation of any federal laws. Should subsidies only be available to people who live in states with those marketplaces? Our legal panel will join us to weigh in on that and much, much more, including the Justice Department report that came out today showing that the police department in Ferguson, Missouri violated civil rights laws by disproportionately targeting minorities. Some unbelievable things unearthed this report here, and the Attorney General is not biting his tongue. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you very much for joining us. And tonight, our legal panel will weigh in on those and many more issues, from Obamacare here to what happens, as I mentioned, in Ferguson, and also the NSA leaker, Edward Snowden's desire to come back to the states, and even the Justice Department's report, as I said, about where justice starts and stops when it comes to Ferguson. We'll get into all that and much, much more here. But first, let's turn to Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who is speaking out about Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech before Congress, stranded Superstorm Sandy victims, as well as campus sex assaults. Well, as much as any lawmaker, you've been on the forefront to address sexual assaults both in the military and certainly on college campuses. And, I mean, New York's got a very dubious distinction of being number one in terms of having more colleges under federal investigation given sexual assaults. Just how prevalent have you found this issue to be on college campuses, not just in the country, but particularly in your state?
Well, we know the crime is prevalent, and we know it takes place in all schools across the country. And so the reason why we have federal legislation is we want to keep our campuses safe. We want to actually change how colleges handle these crimes and how they work with law enforcement and how they have their own adjudication processes within their schools.
You know, I know you're familiar with the story of Sarah Tubbs, and for our audience who doesn't remember her story, former student at Stony Brook, an alleged victim of sexual assault. What the school put her through, where she also had to basically act as her own counsel to cross-examine the alleged assailant and be cross-examined by him. Does that happen in more college campuses than we think? And I mean, to the average person, I speak for myself, not only does it seem backwards here, but it really, I mean, my God, you're putting this person through this not once but twice.
Exactly. And that's what we hear from survivors all across the country, all across our state, is that the processes in place at these schools are not serving anyone. They're not serving the needs of the survivor. They're not serving the needs of the accused, because the people running these adjudication processes aren't trained. They don't know enough about the crime. They don't know enough about what type of post-traumatic stress that a survivor goes through, how that affects them. They don't know enough. And so what our bill requires is better training, making sure the people who deal with these types of cases are trained. We also put in place a confidential advisor. So the first person a survivor talks to can have someone who can speak to her confidentially and say, these are your options. If you go the school route, this is what's going to happen. This is what it looks like. If you go criminal justice, this is what it looks like. This is what's going to happen. And so she or he has all the tools they need to make decisions about their future.
After all the work you've done on this, are you still confident that colleges can actually play a role in this process? You can easily argue they have conflicts of interest, all the bad press that comes out of this, arguably that they got two different students. I mean,
so what's happened in the past is that conflict of interest is why these cases aren't coming forward. In fact, 40% of colleges across the country said they never reported a sexual assault ever. So it's not that sexual assaults aren't happening on those campuses. It's that either people aren't reporting or they are reporting and those cases are shoved under the rug. It's been in the best incentives for the schools to hide these cases because they don't want to be known as a school where rapes take place. With this change in legislation, the incentives will be flipped and they will now be incentivized to fix the problem, not just cover it up. It's also a bipartisan bill. We have broad bipartisan support, so I'm optimistic we can actually pass this legislation this year.
And Senator, I want to transition now to Sandy and the after effects more than 2 years later from that devastating storm. Anyone who saw the 60 Minutes piece was outraged, and there's a lot of different folks to be mad at, most notably the insurance companies, as well as also FEMA. But for folks who didn't see it, I want to just play a couple clips here. This from one of the many thousands of New Yorkers who lost their home in the storm and what they dealt with in the aftermath, as well as hearing from an adjuster about just how much fraud actually apparently went down.
The engineer sent his report in to the insurance company saying that the house was damaged due to flood. The structural damage is caused by the flood. And from what I understand, the insurance company changed his words without him knowing.
This is Andrew Brom, the engineer who could no longer stay silent.
I wanted to call them from day one. I wanted to tell them that this is not me. I didn't do this.
Brom told us not only were changes made to his engineering reports, but he was asked to cover it up.
So, Senator, I know that you, as well as also Senator Schumer and the two senators from New Jersey, have begun an investigation into this. From what you already know, who should we be most mad at here? The insurance companies with the fraud they perpetrated, or FEMA, who should be looking out for us, but in many ways was abetting this?
I think all of the above. Because, in fact, first of all, you see evidence, and I've seen some of these documents, you see evidence of wide-scale fraud. And that may not even be limited to Superstorm Sandy. This may go back as far as Hurricane Katrina, for all we know. And you see notice to FEMA that doesn't seem responded to. So we need a full investigation. Not only is our Attorney General doing an investigation, we have an IG's investigation within FEMA, and we are calling for hearings here in Washington. We need to get to the bottom of who knew what and what they were doing and why they were doing it, and hold those responsible for this fraudulent criminal behavior.
Will those thousands of New Yorkers be made whole, you think, at the end of the day?
I want to make sure that they can be part of this investigation and this litigation, and that they can actually be part of a much more holistic approach to giving them the funds they need to rebuild their lives.
And finally, Senator, just a question regarding the news cycle yesterday. Mr. Netanyahu's speech, you saw a lot of Democrats upset. The president himself said nothing new there. And you also had former Speaker Pelosi saying that she was offended here by the condescension she felt that was coming from the Prime Minister. What was your take away from the address?
Well, I don't think the Prime Minister covered any new ground, but I do think he has legitimate concerns about what Iran's intentions are. But I am supporting the President's effort to try to reach common ground.
Senator, I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
When we come back, we're going to bring in our legal panel. They're going to join us to weigh in on a number of issues facing our country, including before our highest court. The challenge to Obamacare here that's being heard in the Supreme Court, in fact, starting today. Department of Justice also reaching a decision charging the Ferguson Police Department with civil rights violations against African Americans. Is there more that can be done on a local government level to combat racial bias before the complaints even head to the feds? We'll be right back with that and much more.